Segment 2, Gold and Black Live, and we're going to get right to it because this guy is a busy man. Seth Davis, CBS, Sports Illustrated. He wears a number of hats, and a proud author too of not his first book, but his newest book, of course, A Coach's Life, and the biography of John Wooden. And Seth, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Alan, great to talk to you, man. How are you, sir? Happy New Year.
Well, Happy New Year to you, and I'm doing well. Ran into a friend of yours. I'm not a name dropper, but I did ran into a good friend of yours yesterday at the airport. I was coming back from North Carolina, but Clark Kellogg says hello, and I know you'll be seeing and hearing a lot. We'll all be hearing a lot from Clark down the road. But Seth, you are in New York?
Yes, I am. I live in Los Angeles now. I took the path that John Wooden traveled from to the West Coast at a similar time in life, but I work on the East Coast at CBS over the weekend, so that's where I am now. Yeah,
and obviously the book comes out on Tuesday, and near and dear to Purdue fans, Purdue people, but obviously this is a national, if not international, figure in John Wooden. Boy, I know, because you and I talked maybe a couple of years ago about this project. This has been a labor of love. Tell us a little bit about, obviously, with your background in basketball, and anybody that loves basketball like you do has an appreciation for John Wooden. But tell us a little bit about how this came to pass for you, and where this journey began, and for finishing this book.
Well, someone who covers college basketball for Sports Illustrated. Obviously, I had developed an interest in John Wooden and had read a lot about him like everybody else. And I happened to be living in Los Angeles many years ago and had breakfast with Wooden and Ben Howland, who had just gotten hired by UCLA. And my idea was to get the two of them together, have breakfast, and write a column about it for SI.com. Well, that breakfast turned into about a 5-hour visit. After breakfast, we went back to Wooden's condominium and sat in his den, and he read poetry and...
Yeah.
I spent time with him and talking to him, but also reading about him and hearing about him and talking to other people about him. I just sensed, Alan, there's a lot more to this guy than had been written. He had been presented as this two-dimensional character, never made a mistake, never had any flaws, never had a bad day, never got criticized. And, of course, that's not real life, and I wanted to write about that third dimension, which is not to say that the book is a takedown by any stretch. It's certainly not. But it is, I think, a very thorough and balanced portrayal of what his life was actually like and what he was actually like. And he had some rough edges, as we all do. He was a very tough competitor, could be tough on referees. And even, his playing days at Purdue, I think, are really going to be a revelation to a lot of people. A lot of people, Alan, I'd be out and, talking to fellow sports writers. I'm about hardcore college basketball people. Well, everything's been written about John Wooden. Everybody knows everything about John Wooden. Let me ask you one question. Where did John Wooden go to college?
Mm-hmm.
Most of them don't know.
Yep.
And, so how many of them then know that, in the first 50 years of basketball, John Wooden was one of the 10 best players? I mean, people don't really know who this guy was. And I consider it an incredible privilege to be able to present his life story to the world, and I consider this to be the comprehensive, definitive story of his life.
In the fact that he lived 99 years, and he's almost a mystical, if not mythical figure. And his last, I don't know, maybe since his last college game, the legend continued to grow in purity. And I thought, and I think you did a great job. And I have not read the whole book, but I've read all the Purdue stuff, and pretty much have gotten halfway through it. It's just it does tell a story of a guy that is flawed, like we all are, but also a guy that had doubt. I mean, look at in the opening of the book, talking about how he. And I don't know, I think it's the opening credit, of basically saying, I wish all my friends would win one national title, and my enemies, I don't know if that's the correct word, but it says basically, I wish them several more. The pressure that he was under, I thought you did an excellent job in the UCLA section, especially of really talking about Lou Alcindor was a blessing, yes, but he also was a scourge in terms of having to deal with all that went around that.
Well, one of the broad themes of the book is that that 12-year period, the last 12 years of his coaching career, when he won those 10 NCAA titles, were in many respects the most unhappy years of his life.
Yeah.
Because it's not something he ever set out to do. He was very thin-skinned when it came to criticism, and he was insecure, Alan. You know, like a lot of great achievers, Wooden was motivated partly by insecurity. It's definitely in his psychological makeup, and it's common, I think, with people who came out of the Great Depression as well. So, you know, it led him to make, you know, certain decisions in terms of how he ran his program, and also, you know, not to spoil it for you when you get to the end of the book, but you know, it was interesting to point out where, you know, the official version that John Wooden told of his life and things that had happened to him diverged from the fact of what actually happened. So that's something that insecure people do. You know, we all do it. You know, our stories get better over the years, and you know, he was not above stretching the truth to tell a better story than what actually happened.
Yeah, I know that I've already run into a couple of them, and I'm trying to think of a specific example, but talking about his losing seasons, I believe it was that he had it was at UCLA, I believe, but yeah, that the record was different. Or I guess no, it was at one of his high school.
In high school, yeah, it was his
Central.
first year. Well, what happened is actually interesting, Alan. You know, he had always said, or for many years had said, that he never experienced a losing season as a player or a coach.
Yeah.
Well, when these two Los Angeles Times reporters wrote a book in 1974 called The Wizard of Westwood,
right.
And it was really, you know, the only other book out there that's been done that has kind of the same mission that mine does. They discovered that he had a losing season in his first year at Dayton High School. Well, during the course of my research for this book, I hired somebody who works in the library in South Bend, Indiana, and asked him to go through all of the coverage of John Wooden's teams and give me, you know, I was getting different numbers as far as his win-loss record in those high school years at South Bend, and this guy went literally game by game, and he discovered, I thought it was a mistake. I called my guy. I said, "Are you sure about this?" He said, "No, his second year at South Bend Central High School,
right.
He had a losing record." So, you know, call it selective amnesia if you want, or, you know, I mean, if you coach for, including high school, you know, I coached for about 47 years, only had 2 losing seasons. You'd think he'd remember them. But, you know, again, that's, there are a number of instances like that. You know, the story that he told about his second year at Indiana State, when there was a national tournament, the NAIB tournament in Kansas City, where it was a whites-only tournament, and the story that he told was that because he had a black player, he would refuse to take his team to the tournament unless it changed, and they changed it, and so he brought his team to the tournament. Well, it's half true. He did bring his team to the tournament, and his black player was the first black man. His name was Clarence Walker, to play in a national tournament, but the changing of the rule had nothing to do with John Wood. In fact, he had already accepted the invitation and had told Clarence Walker that he was leaving him back in Terre Haute, and he was going to take the rest of the team to Kansas City for this tournament. That's a very, very different version of events than what John Wooden told. So, you know, again, that's the sort of biographer's mission, to just sort of present, you know, all of his, you know, bright colors, the lights, the darks, and everything in between.
And you know, on the Clarence Walker part, I thought it was very, very telling. Because it seemed, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody else, but I do think it is an important theme too, that Clarence, I would say the term forgave, but he understood where John Wooden was coming from, and I thought in some ways allowed that to come full circle in his appraisal that yes, he knew that John Wooden wasn't perfect and maybe was racially sensitive when it was convenient, but he also seemed to give him credit, and certainly that the part about the diary that you had, I thought was terrific and really insightful into what it was like for both Wooden and for Clarence Walker at that time.
Well, it's, you know, again, it's the biographer's mission, not just to be thorough and not just to be accurate, to put everything in context.
Right.
You know, it's, you know, we can, you know, try to make moral judgment sitting here in 2014. You're talking about Terre Haute, Indiana,
yeah.
1948. This was in the heyday of Jim Crow, and Clarence Walker, as he wrote so eloquently in his diary, really struggled as a young black man, just coming to the realization that there would be certain limits, legal limits placed on him, that he would never be able to maximize his full potential. First, because something that he couldn't control, and he obviously struggled with the injustice of that. But that was the world that they lived in, and he was around John Wooden every single day. And he knows a racist when he sees one, and he knows someone who's not racist when he sees it. And he knew that John Wooden was not racist. He was with him every day. And even though he was very hurt by the decision that Wood made not to take him to Kansas City, it's not something that he held against Wood. He was with him every day.
You know, I think you think about where John Wooden, in context, like you said, is absolutely critical, but you have to understand, Martinsville is one of the worst, had one of the biggest Klan influences over the years at that time when John Wooden was growing up. And then you deal with, and then you live in, like you said, in Terre Haute. I'm not giving him a pass for his beliefs or exactly how he handled, but you would understand, again, from a contextual standpoint, where some of this might have come from.
And Alan, let me just say, by the way, especially since because of your audience and where your show is being broadcast, I debunk a lot of that about Martinsville. You know, Martinsville, partly because of John Wooden, and largely really because of incidents, some ugly incidents that happened there.
Yeah.
In more recent times, there's this widely held belief and assumption that Martinsville was, quote, the Midwest headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan, as if the Ku Klux Klan has headquarters. That is not true. Martinsville was certainly a hotbed of Klan activity, but Indiana was, in that time, this was the heyday of the Ku Klux Klan. So Martinsville was no better or no worse, and in some ways it was not as bad as some neighboring towns with respect to the Klan. So I did come away from that part of my research feeling that Martinsville had gotten a bad rap in terms of the context of its history with the Klan.
Yeah, and I think in a very important distinction there. What do you think John Wooden thought of? You obviously, I thought, neatly tied together the tie really between James Naismith and the chain that got through his John Wooden's coach Piggy Lambert to John Wooden, and kind of nicely tied together really from a basketball historical perspective. But what do you think John Wooden took to his days at Purdue, and how much that really meant to him? Do you view?
Well, he got his whole basketball philosophy from Piggy Lambert, and that's and I tell the story of Piggy Lambert and why it was that somebody would in early 1930s, late 1920s, at a time when there were no blacks playing college basketball, when after every made basket the teams went back to midcourt and had a jump ball, why it would be someone's basketball philosophy to have a fast break. Well, as you well know, you know better than anybody, Piggy Lambert basically invented the fast break, and he was the only one who actually used that phrase. People called it fire wagon basketball or a racehorse basketball, and it was kind of an Indiana staple, but he was one of the few coaches that was doing that back then, and that gave John Wooden his whole philosophy about how to create a basketball team, with the notion that the one thing that you can control is your physical condition. You might not be able to make yourself taller or faster, but you can make sure you're in the best possible shape. So when the end of the game comes, if you've gotten that other team to play your style of play, then they're going to be tired and you won't, and you'll have that competitive disadvantage. And that's how he was as a player, and that's how he was as a coach. And he came out to California at a time when people were playing flow basketball, the Henry Iba influence. Pete Newell at California was a Henry Iba disciple. It was all about slowing it down, holding the ball. Remember, there was no shot clock. And here comes Johnny Wooden from the Midwest with racehorse basketball, teaching the fast break. And it only took him 16 years, but his first championship team at UCLA did not have a starter over 6'5". So, those philosophies and principles that he got from Piggy Lambert are the ones that carried him, to the greatest of heights.
Another one of the things that you tend to hear in leadership books or whatever, it took John Wooden, 16 years at UCLA before he won a national championship, and he wouldn't have survived in today's world. He did have a pretty good start at UCLA, got things off to a pretty good start, and had consistently very good teams. Do you buy that theory now that in today's world, John Wooden wouldn't have still been coaching? He'd have been an anomaly having coached 16 years anywhere, I guess, in today's world. But how do you view that? Well,
it took him 14 years before he won his first game in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Think about that. You think Steve Alford will make it 14 years without winning a game?
Yeah.
In the NCAA tournament? So, no, it's a completely different world. And part of the reason why Alford would never last that long is because of what John Wooden was able to do. So this was something that was also starting to eat at him. It's like I was saying, that 12-year period were very unhappy years for him. He had a heart attack. He dealt with a lot of criticism. I remember having lunch with, I don't mean to name drop on you, but I remember having lunch with Rick Pitino a year or two ago, and he was asking me a lot of questions about Wooden, and I said, yeah, he was very thin-skinned about criticism. He said, criticism? He said, who could ever criticize John Wooden? Really got criticism? Of course he got criticism. Yeah. He was a dominant public figure, and first he was criticized for not winning enough, and then when he was winning so big, he got criticized for ruining the basketball. So the level of expectations, he always told the story of after winning his last championship and announcing his retirement and winning the championship, he had won 10 overall in 12 years. He had won 7 in a row. Then in Bill Walton's year, they lost in the semifinals in double overtime to NC State. And then in 75, he won it again, and then he was done. So he wins it, and then afterwards, some booster who he never named says to him, hey, Coach, congratulations. You let us down last year, but you made up for it. That was the dynamic. It really, because his last championship team was his least talented of all of the championship teams, and yet he was still able to deliver them an NCAA championship. So he was very, very much on top of his game as a coach. But he, what he said to his players is, I'm bowing out, not because I want to, but because I have to. It just got to be too much for him.
Why do you, and this is, you can understand, but there were, and again, the great stories during that period, certainly with Edgar Lacey and Bill Sweek on that. Of course, Purdue fans know of Bill Sweek, longtime Purdue fans. He's the one that hit the long shot to beat Purdue in the first game.
That's a long memory right there.
But that is a long memory, but it is a fascinating story, a story I'd never heard of, obviously, what happened in the national semifinal the 2 nights before they played Purdue, which I won't talk about because it's a great story. But why do you think, I mean, maybe this is stating the obvious, but, guys that he had some issues with, Keith, had some troubles with over time, again, almost perpetuated this myth, this persona of John Wooden in his later years. Did John Wooden change dramatically, in your opinion, from because he got out of coaching and the death of his wife certainly was a difficult thing for him, as it would be for anyone. But the tremendous loyalty by his players, was it? What do you think fueled that? Was it just the great success those teams had, and combined with Wooden's personality and his grandfatherly nature? How do you view that?
Well, it's all of the above. I mean, part of it again goes back to Wooden's insecurity, that he was very intent on preserving and burnishing his image and his legacy. And I don't say that in any type of pejorative way. I mean, yeah. He was very accessible, extremely gracious with his time. I mean, as his biographer, as a biographer, I'm extremely grateful to him, giving his time to people like yourself and talking about Purdue. I mean, he gave lengthy interviews to the Purdue Sports Information Department. They sent me a video. I mean, I had John Wooden on video for 3 hours talking about his time at Purdue. I mean, how valuable of an oral history that is. He did the same thing with the Springfield Basketball Hall of Fame. He spent like 8 hours talking to them. I had that on video. So, he was very much accessible and sort of cultivated this image. And again, sort of built the myth and kind of straight from fact a little bit. But, he did become a different person. And I think that's really, one of the great virtues of John Wood. He had that sign on his office wall that said, it's what you learn after you know it, all that counts. And he really believed that. He lived like that. He got a little bit better each day, and it didn't stop when he stopped coaching. And we think of him as this kind of rigid, conservative Midwesterner who always stuck to his principles in the face of change. But he was very adaptable, very open-minded. And when those former players came around and renewed their relationship with him, he felt such genuine love for them, and he loved being around them and talking to them. And they were able to gain a better understanding of what it was he was trying to teach, and he gained a better understanding of where he fell short, and he acknowledged and apologized for that instead of being angry and rigid and like a lot of people would be. He got sweeter as he got older, and it was such a blessing that he lived to be nearly 100. and that he was so mentally sharp all of his life. You know, it was until his last breath he was still mentally sharp. It's just that his body gave out on him. You know, he was 100. So, you know, I think that's really something you can say about Wooden that's extremely admirable. He always said to his players, you know, he never talked about winning. He said, let's just get a little better every day. And that's what he did in his life. He got a little bit better every day. And let me tell you something. If you get a little bit better every day, and you live to be 100, you're going to get to be pretty good, and he did.
Seth, this could go on for an hour, and you've been gracious with your time, and we'd love to have you back on at some point in time when your schedule becomes, I don't know when that will be, when it becomes less hectic, but it is.
When I'm dead. It will become less hectic when I'm dead, but that's a good thing.
That's from John Wooden, too, because if John Wooden was a busy man with all the folks that came to see him. But one quick question on and I don't know how much you've been able to watch Purdue, but also just maybe a quick look at the Big Ten and where you see, you know, Purdue had obviously a big win at Illinois. The Boilermakers obviously have a lot of work to do, but assess what you see the Big Ten is right now and where things, you know, does Purdue have a chance to work its way? This is somewhat answers itself, but they have a chance to work its way back in the NCAA tournament picture.
Well, it's a tough climb. I mean, obviously that win at Illinois was terrific, and in fact, I'm going to be at Northwestern on Tuesday for the Purdue game at Northwestern. I'm going to be calling that for the Big Ten Network, so I'll be a lot more boned up on Purdue, hopefully, by the time that game tips off. But you know, it's a really, really tough league, Alan. You know this. I mean, it's the best league in the country. It's extremely unforgiving. When a team like Ohio State, as good as they are, can lose 3 in a row, you know it's a really difficult league, and Purdue is still kind of in its rebuilding mode. You know you have a great coach, you know you have a great culture. You got some young guys, you know, obviously a player like A.J. Hammonds who, you know, if he could ever find a way to crank up that motor, could really be a special player. But you know he's a work in progress, like all of us are a work in progress right now. So you know that win over Illinois should give you hope that maybe there's something popping there. It might give you an indication that Illinois is headed for some trouble, but you know you've got some good young players. You got a great coach, and let's see what happens. It's not early, but it's not late yet either. So the best, you know, the most significant basketball is still yet to be played.
All right. Well, you'll be up to get a chance to see Purdue firsthand then on Tuesday, and a standing invitation. One of the friends of the Gold and Black, Jeff Julich from Follett, they said, "Boy, we'd love to get Seth in town to do a book signing." So. I'll give you some information about that as well. Hopefully that time will come sooner than later. But hey, thanks so much for your time, Seth. Good luck with the book promotion, and enjoy your family, and we'll look forward to talking down the road soon.
Thank you, Alan, and just so everybody knows, you were a huge help to me on the book, so I give you full credit and just appreciation for your help and your friendship.
Hey, we appreciate that very much. An honor to be in there. Seth, thanks again.
Okay.
All right, we're going to take a 2-minute break.